So in this section, we wanted to look at some of the challenging behaviour that people with dementia can exhibit and some strategies that might help you if you're caring for someone, partly to understand it, but also some strategies we found helpful. So, I mean, would it help to kind of talk a bit about where a lot of challenging behaviour tends to come from, in terms of just kind of understanding the process a bit?
Sometimes you need to understand where the person's coming from, I think.
Okay.
So why are they exhibiting the behaviours they are? And sometimes it can be that they're remembering a time when they were at work, for example. So you can have someone that at 4 o'clock is used to going and doing something. And so at 4 o'clock they start exhibiting behaviour that you're like, where are they trying to go to? It's because at that point they always went to catch a bus, or they always went to do something. Or people who've been at work a long time get very frustrated with not having things to do. And so people get bored. I mean, I do think boredom is a massive thing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then they can get like quite frustrated with being bored, and frustration can lead to other things. So I think there's something about, if you're caring for someone, keeping them occupied or having something that keeps them occupied. So Mum, for example, I was saying earlier, quite liked the end titles of the Harry Potter film. The third Harry Potter film, where there were footsteps on a map going round.
Oh, the Marauder's Map.
Marauder's Map. She could just watch that over and over again. And even when cognitively she could no longer read and she couldn't follow a film right the way through, just that section would keep her occupied for ages.
Right.
Music can often help as well, but I'm going into helping strategies and I want to get back to the behaviours. I think though, certain things can trigger. So there can be triggers that go off and people can suddenly start behaving in ways that you're just like, where does that come from? I think just understanding where it has come from and why they're behaving that way can help an awful lot.
And I think one of the things that can often be quite difficult to deal with is aggression. You know, particularly if that's not been a feature of your relationship with that person for perhaps ever or a very long time, and suddenly they're aggressive or angry, and that can be made a lot worse by confusion.
And aggression is a really tricky one, especially if the person's been a calm-natured, loving father, husband, and suddenly they've become very angry and physically assaulting you. And we do deal with that a lot in the community and in care homes and in the hospital setting. And it's often very difficult to de-escalate that behaviour, because often it's the person's only means of communicating how distressed they feel. Is all I can say, really. I don't know if you can sort of quantify any further.
I think if you're at home as well with someone who's aggressive, that if you find them being aggressive to you, one of the things I'd say is, before you start to try and understand it, maybe make sure you're safe.
Yes,
because you know, people can launch into things like, I've known people try and strangle their wives or punch their wives or do things to people which are totally out of character. You're right, but they're suddenly doing that, and I think the first thing to do as a carer is to think, how can I be safe? How's my safety paramount in this?
And I think the other thing, when we talked about it being linked to confusion, is I can remember looking after someone who'd had dementia, but they were at the very early stages of the dementia, but because they weren't eating and drinking properly, that had actually meant that they ended up being very constipated and they were dehydrated. And those chemical changes suddenly made a huge shift in their behaviour. So sometimes people might imagine, oh, well, this is about the dementia. It might be something else. Is their food different? Is there
pain?
Are they in pain
Infection.
and they're struggling to express it? Absolutely.
So I think there's the understanding why, but also with aggression there is keeping safe.
Yes.
Particularly if you're with someone.
And the police are really good at responding to these situations in a very gentle way. I mean, the police force where I work have got a specialist dementia PCSO now in place, and she's just fantastic, and she knows everybody in the town that's got dementia, and she knows where people are starting to escalate and wobble, and she provides a lot of support to those families in terms of keeping them safe, especially when they're perhaps more mobile and, you know, walking around at night and things, she knows exactly how to support those families.
And that's a really good point, because people may think, oh, well, I don't want to involve the people, I don't want to get people into trouble. But actually, she said they would have experienced it, and
Definitely.
sometimes can have very good skills about de-escalating, particularly if someone's being violently aggressive, and just helping them calm down and support them. So.
Yeah, definitely.
I think as well as understanding where that person's come from and understanding that there may be other causes, the whole thing around caring for someone with challenging behaviours. You mentioned about walking around at night. There's a huge thing around dementia with something that some people call wandering, other people call choosing to move. I read a fantastic quote about it which said that for somebody without dementia, I'm just popping out for a walk is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. Somebody with dementia pops out for a walk and everyone thinks they're wandering and that there's no purpose. So I think there's something about the purpose of the movement and where they're going to and where they're trying to get to, and understanding that. And also that familiar things to people with dementia can look very strange, and so they can get lost easily, and there is a question of safety. And there's a huge balance to be had between carers feeling that they need someone to be kept safe and the person with dementia feeling that they have the right to go out and go for a walk if they choose to, or go out or move about in any way they choose. And also there's the whole thing about physical activity being good for people, and also being good for their depressions and all the rest of it, and also being able to move around with that. So
I think many local authorities now have such a good investment in telecare. I know that a lot of people who live with dementia have GPS trackers now that link to their carers' phones, and you can even set boundaries on those trackers, which is incredibly positive to allow people that independence.
We used technology with my stepdad, because although we were caring for him, we weren't living in the house, and so it was a really good way of us being able to get a bit of a sense of his routine, making sure that he didn't wander off. And it was really useful, and I think they can be quite unintrusive, and they can help support you as a carer, because I think there's an assumption sometimes that all carers are living with the person they're caring for, but actually you may be at a distance, or you may live elsewhere. So.
And I don't think it's always the wisest thing to lock people in.
No.
So we do have people who are locked into their homes, and what if there's a fire? What if something goes wrong? And I agree, technology can provide a really good answer to some of that.
And also the fire service can they can flag addresses where people are very, very vulnerable, and perhaps, we've got people that are nursed upstairs in bed 24 hours a day, and the fire service know exactly that those people are there and have no means of escape. And it's always worth linking with your local fire safety officer to get that sort of assessment.
Well, I remember with my stepdad, one of the aspects of his cognitive function started to go is we noticed that he was frying more and more, and what we hadn't realised was he could no longer operate the oven and the microwave. They were actually too complicated. So when he was hungry, he would fry. Now, most of the time that was okay, but if someone leaves a frying pan and walks out of the room, that can be a huge fire issue. So we actually sat down and we talked to the carers, and then we worked out that actually if someone could just come in and cook for him, it was fine. He didn't then get hungry, he didn't feel the need to do some frying. And sometimes it's almost just understanding where they're coming from. It's a perfectly reasonable response if you can't use the oven and the microwave to fry. But.
Or using microwaves for inappropriate things. We've had people who have put things in the microwave that have then exploded the microwave.
I got a text just yesterday from a carer saying that her dad had cooked a chocolate cake for 50 minutes instead of 50 seconds. So that had redecorated the kitchen.
Exploding chocolate cake all through the microwave.
But I mean, again, back to your county council, you can get people's gas and electric disconnected from the cooker to keep them that bit safe, especially gas, because you don't want people leaving gas hobs on.
And we've been talking a bit about aggression, and we were talking sort of about physical aggression, but also verbal aggression. I mean, that can be incredibly upsetting if somebody's saying incredibly hurtful things. And often, if you've been in a relationship with someone for a long time, they know the buttons to press to really upset or really dig up old rows. And I think almost understanding that kind of where this comes from, but you also need to look after your own mental health as well as your own physical health. And that can be really upsetting to be on the receiving end of some of that verbal aggression.
Especially foul language
Yeah.
and, repetitive questions. I sat in, we work on the same ward. I sat doing some writing the other day with a chap who lived with dementia. He must have asked me 40 times in that hour I was there, where was his wife? And each time I was very polite and distracting him, trying to find something to do. But then I tried to sort of empathise how his wife must feel 24/7 with those questions.
Being asked those questions, yeah.
Over and over and over.
And I think sometimes for a carer, it's really important to say it's normal, because they often think that it's them, or there's something going on with them. Why is my mum being like this?
Yeah.
Or why is this happening? Actually, to go, do you know what? That's part of the disease. Or do you know what? It's perfectly normal for them to be like this. Is actually quite reassuring. And I know that with my sister-in-law, that it's very easy for me to just say to her, do you know what, Mum is exactly the same, or to say, actually, that's normal, don't worry about it. But the repetitive questions, distraction is a great weapon in our arsenals. So if you can say things like, do you know what, the garden needs digging, let's go out and dig the garden, even if it doesn't need digging, that actually getting to them to do something different can actually make a big difference. Or let's go down to the supermarket.
Yeah.
My mum used to spend ages filling up a trolley with chocolate bars that she was never going to eat. She just liked filling up the trolley with chocolate bars. I was terrible because I used to push it to the end and go, she doesn't want these. You could see the staff going, what
are we going to do with all these chocolate
But it did,
bars?
it distracted her. It stopped her thinking about whatever it was that was getting on her nerves. She'd had fun.
Yeah.
Clearly Sainsbury's or Tesco's hadn't had much fun, but, it was what it was.
And I think people can get stuck in those sort of almost like cognitive grooves where they just keep going round and round. And sometimes just nudging them out. And it takes them on a different channel.
And it can be hard to nudge them out,
Really hard.
that people can get very obsessive. And they can get into a kind of like a name or something that they constantly repeat and repeat and repeat, and it's very hard for you to say, okay, let's have a cup of tea now. Or
so what are
let's
some
do
of the
something.
techniques you've used, or some of the questions or activities that you found really helpful?
I think like things like dominoes, drafts, chess, those really good board games are really good because they take quite a while, and people have retained that knowledge on how to play them from being young children, so they will adapt straight back into that.
Snap.
Yeah, crosswords, they can always manage a crossword, and where that comes from.
Little puzzles.
Yeah.
My dad did Sudoku obsessively, and that was great. You could set him off with Sudoku, and I think just the things. My stepmother really likes biographies, and so she will read the same bit over and over again. But she'll read 2 volumes on Churchill. Will take her months. And you can just say, where are you getting to with this book? And she'll pick the book up. Or she likes cricket. So she'll just listen to cricket on the radio all day. She doesn't need the television, but just the cricket on the radio.
Send her to sleep.
It takes her back to a time when she used to creep up down first thing in the morning, and her dad would be listening to the cricket on the radio. And their mum was still in bed. And she'd creep down into the kitchen and she'd go, come on, have a cup of tea, love, and we'll just listen to the cricket. And they'd listen to the cricket together, and it was their thing to do. So think from her, And one of the things about being a carer is you know these things. You know where this is coming from. You know the kind of past history of this person and why this is important to them. And they may want to tell you the same story over and over and over again. And it can get so wearing. It can get so wearing. But eventually you need to think, okay, so they are telling me this story again, saying, Mum, you told me this morning. Mum, this is the 8th time you've told me this. Isn't very helpful. Because firstly, the person themselves thinks, really? Did I? When? And so they're feeling upset. And secondly, what you're doing is setting up a challenge. And I don't think that's a good way of dealing with it. The best way is just to try and change the subject.
And I think that's a really good point. And often older stories, the longer term memory tends to stay intact a lot longer. And so I remember when my mum, very much towards the end, we'd just tell lots of stories about her childhood. She'd tell stories about my childhood, things I hadn't remembered. And one thing I've heard about in a number of podcasts, and I sort of wish I'd done, is actually recording some of those conversations.
Oh, yeah, that would have been
Because then, for younger relatives and younger children, it's like, here's some stories about, what life, so if she told me one story about when she saw bananas for the first time after a war, she must have told it me 20 times. But then I'd ask about another relative, or what was that uncle like, or what was the shop like around the corner, or what was the school like. And they were often memories of a lot of joy.
Yeah. And they often would link with photographs. I always see a lot of people with lovely photo albums, and it's lovely when they've been labelled correctly, and because that brings back such lovely times, doesn't it? Oh, we went to Blackpool Beach, and
and that can just get people out of that think
this
where they're just
cycle.
it can, and you can just open the photo album and just go, okay, so
Tell me
let's talk
about this day.
Tell me about this person.
Lovely.
So we talked a bit about repetitive questions, and noise making is another thing that sometimes people talk.
I'm laughing because Dave came to my house once when Mum was being very, very noisy and banging, constant banging. But she was upset because I had a visitor and she didn't have a visitor.
So she wasn't the centre of all your world.
She wasn't impressed at all, and she ran away as well on that day, which she did quite often. But it was constant banging, and it's very hard to keep your temper. I just know it can be so hard to just be patient. Please
How long did that go on for, that banging?
Hours.
It was hours, I think,
And there was nothing you could do to distract her. And
I was trying to work, so I hadn't got a carer to look after her while she needed 24-hour care. So I had to try and manage that situation while also trying to have a meeting with Dave and work.
And the minute he left, did it cease?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, the minute she ran away.
Right.
She ran away, she took a copy of her PhD across the road to the Italian restaurant, which is where she always ran away to. She ran away to the Italian restaurant, and she used to sit down, and they were fantastic. They'd give her a cup of coffee, and then someone in Chef White's would come across the road and go, Ali, your mum's here again.
That sounds such a good plan.
It was beautiful. And then she'd be there with a cup of coffee, regaling them all with whatever story it was. But she got, on that day, she had a copy of her PhD, and she took it and she made him sign that Ercole was coming, who was our friend who's Italian, because she was insistent that I'd had Dave over, and that meant that someone else couldn't come, but I didn't realise that.
Oh, yeah, there's often a hidden theory, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's unpicking that theory.
Yeah, it is. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, he wrote down that the head person who owned the restaurant, and Maurizio and Cinzia, wrote down, Ercole is coming to stay, and that calmed her down totally.
Wow.
And then she was fine. So I was saying that at the time when she was being challenging and she was making a lot of noise, and she went across the road to the Italian restaurant with her copy of her PhD, which she made the Italian owners, Cinzia and Maurizio, sign to say that Ercole was coming. Ercole was an Italian friend of ours who was very close to Mum, and basically she was frightened that because I had someone else with me, which was you at the time, that meant that Ercole wouldn't come to the house. So they calmed her down and said yes, Ercole would come. The fact that they had signed her PhD with Ercole is coming, written underneath with like signed Maurizio and Cinzio, basically calmed her completely down, plus a nice cup of coffee and a biscuit in the Italian restaurant. So when I went over to collect her, she was completely calm. And she went, you see, I've told you, I knew you wouldn't have him around, but they've signed to say he's coming. And I went, that's fine then, Mum.
And then she would have moved on to something completely different.
She was absolutely fine after that and had forgotten all about it.
And I think it's really lovely to actually find some of those strategies that tap into either memories or really happy places that you think, okay, this might work. You know, it may not work every time, but you know, when some of that behaviour, particularly if you're getting frustrated as a carer, because I think it's almost sometimes like being a parent of a young child that just won't stop making noise. It's the level of frustration and actually dealing with that as well yourself.
The worst time with Mum was when she was in pain. And I went to the doctors. I had 2 doctors out to her. I had another doctor that I went to see, and they all said it was a progression of her dementia. So every single one of them went, and she was screaming, and she banged her head against the wall so much that she bled on the top of her head, and she was screaming, "God, kill me now, kill me now, kill me now," like this constantly, and bashing her head. And I said, it's not a progression of the dementia. It's basically that there's something wrong. And I think as a carer, you mostly know if something's not right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much the medical professional will tell you, yes, there's nothing wrong, this is progression of dementia, and you know that's not what's happening, then you need to stand your ground. And it took a long time, and I really fought. I rang the Admiral nurses who work with people with dementia, and a good source of knowledge, if there are any in your area. I rang various people that I wanted to ask, is this normal? Are you sure this is normal? It was just awful, and it wasn't until one day when she'd had quite a bit of wine and she calmed completely down because the alcohol had taken the pain away, that she calmed down. And I thought, why is she calm? But she was throwing things, she was aggressive, she slapped me round the face in the middle of the night when she was pacing the house. And eventually I spoke to my own GP, and my own GP, who knew me really well, listened to me and sent her for an x-ray of her spine. And she had a collapsed disc at the bottom of her spine. And so she was in agony. And basically she then had morphine patches, and it resolved. We had the community physio came out, and everything resolved, and she was back to her old self. But if I'd listened to the doctors at the time and thought, yes, it's a progression of her dementia, this is just what it is, she would maybe not have got the attention she needed or the pain control. And it was a really good illustration to me of how much, as a carer, you sometimes have to batter the doors down until you know there's something wrong and you get what you need.
And actually diagnosing pain and managing pain can be particularly tricky, especially as dementia progresses, because, as you said, people's communication skills may not be as good, they may not be able to articulate as well.
There's a massively good pain tool, though, which has been verified on most sort of scientific tests, which is called the Abbey Pain Tool, which we use. The Abbey Pain Tool, which we use in hospital, and you can get copies of it online.
Okay.
And if you went to your GP and said, I've done the Abbey Pain Tool, it takes 1 minute, and you don't need any training, whatever anyone says. And it's very clear what you're assessing. So it's things like whimpering, moaning, groaning, facial expressions, noise making, all sorts of things that go along with that, and it gives you a scoring system. And I think if you went to a doctor or someone else and said, I've done the Abbey Pain Tool and they're measuring 8, I personally think carers should be able to use it and come into somewhere and say that her pain is moderate, or her pain is severe, or his pain is severe, and this is what I'm finding, and I've done this pain analysis. Because, like I said, I kept being told it was a progression of dementia, and it wasn't.
Did you try just giving Mum a couple of paracetamol to see if that...
Yeah, it didn't make any difference.
No,
so the base of her spine had crumbled, so it was something which
I guess
she needed a lot.
For everyday carers, if you do see a change in somebody with dementia that's sudden, it is worth thinking about pain and just trying a couple of paracetamol to see if that's going to help. You know, or maybe getting a sample of the urine and taking it off to the surgery to be checked. You know, little things you've got to... It's almost like detective work, isn't it? When somebody's making, you know, relentless noise, and it's usually because they can't tell you otherwise that they're in distress.
But even, you know, we had a man recently who got very, very aggressive first thing in the morning and was slashing at nurses and doing all this sort of thing, which wasn't his norm. And he'd had a fall and hurt his head. Nobody had given him any pain control. And it was clear that the thing he needed was paracetamol. Absolutely, it wasn't anything big. He just needed, and we got him written up for 4-hourly paracetamol, changed him completely. And I think there is a lot of things about people with undiagnosed pain, and particularly when they can't communicate, and he couldn't communicate. He was not communicative at all. But the fact that he was getting very aggressive, especially first thing in the morning. But I could tell when I looked at him using the Abbey Pain Tool, but also that he was holding his head in his hands. And I said, has anyone considered that he's got his head in his hands, he's got, you know, clips all along the top of his head where he fell, and he hurt his head. And maybe he's got a headache. You know, it can sometimes be incredibly simple. And certainly at home, you can just give someone 2 paracetamol and see if that works.
If it helps.
If they'll take them.
one of the other behaviours that a lot of people can find a bit difficult, and I know the term isn't as popular now, but certainly it was sundowning when I kind of first trained as a nurse, and I think it's where people start to get particularly agitated round about sunset. And is that something you've sort of...
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
I think it does happen a lot.
I think it happens a lot in care homes from what I've seen, and it's worse in winter when the days are shorter. And I think there is some scientific link between the sort of sun setting and how people feel and how they react and interact with other people. And it's almost that fear. It's almost a fear. It's very sad to watch.
But I think if you think about, there's a lot of evidence that people with dementia like bright light.
Yes.
They like bright light, they like everything well lit. And I think if you're feeling confused and you're not quite sure and things go dark, as children we're frightened of the dark. And I think there's something about the fact that as lights go dimmer and the pace starts to go down, I think some of that may have something to do with it.
I think there is,
It does, definitely. But
And I think even just knowing that that's a possible thing, and if there's a sudden change in mood or there's a change in agitation, thinking, it might be this time of the day, and there is a pattern to it, and
pop the light on, you know, provide new stimulation.
yeah, something different to do at that time of day. We talked earlier as well about my mum sort of the old-fashioned term, if we're going into old-fashioned terms, is wanting to move. And I read a great quote about someone who hasn't got dementia goes out for a walk and chooses to go for a walk. Everyone thinks that's fine. And maybe instead of wandering, it's moving without purpose. So where are they going to? But I think always finding out where someone is going. And it is an issue. It's definitely an issue. It's an issue that carers in particular have a terrible time facing, because, you know, if somebody is wandering around and they don't know where they are or what's going on, it can be very frightening for carers that, you know, somebody might not have somewhere to go. And you were talking about electronic
the
tagging and
GPS
checking.
type thing. But also in care homes, it's about, you know, because they often walk. We've got one particular care home, and people walk up and down the same corridor relentlessly. And we've suggested that, you know, put some boxes of things on the floor that are interesting, and, you know, a hat stand. And actually those little things help. You know, on the gentleman's unit, they've got a piece of equipment on the wall where there's some screws and taps that they can, you know, utilise, so that if they're feeling a purpose to that moving. And now, and bus stops in the hospital, we've got a bus stop, so people will wander or have a little stroll to the bus stop.
Yeah.
And I think we've just
There's a bench by the bus.
We've just got to be more creative about things, haven't we? About how people find a purpose to their movement.
Because also it can even be that people have a purpose, but because they're disorientated and lost. So remember, it was actually the tipping point between when my stepdad was no longer able to stay in his own home, where the door was open as a carer had come in, and he'd wandered straight out. And we weren't entirely sure whether he was going to visit his wife's grave or whether it was the shops, but he took a wrong turning, and it took 4 hours, and the police had to get involved, and there was helicopters, and because there was motorways within sort of 10 minutes walk of where we were. And what was quite clear when he was found was he didn't really know where he was. And of course, he was just getting increasingly lost in places that were more and more unfamiliar.
And I think that is an issue if you're caring for someone, that you also do things that physically give people exertion. So rather than sitting all day, that they do things which give them some kind of physical tiredness. Because if people aren't necessarily tired, if they're wanting to walk about, then maybe that's what they need to do. They need to walk about, and they maybe need to walk about a lot more than they're doing in their natural day. Sometimes it can be because at that time they always went to collect their children from the bus stop, and so they're going back. It's 4 o'clock, time to go to the bus stop, because that's where I was supposed to go. I have people I know who go every day to a certain place where they had coffee on a Tuesday with Vera or whoever, and basically they still going there to have coffee with Vera because that's what they think they're doing, and then they get lost because the places are different, the environment's not the same. There's a lot of work going on.
Sensory overload as well.
There's a lot of work going on in the community to make places dementia friendly and to make environments dementia friendly, so that there's things about how the streets, the pavements are level, good lighting everywhere, really clear signage. So often signage isn't very clear. Making sure that places are what they say they are. So for example, here we've got a railway station that isn't a railway station anymore. So that's very confusing for people if they are used to it being a railway station. That's no longer a railway station. So clear evidence of where people are, and also if there's areas where all the houses are the same and the roads look the same, that can be very, very confusing for people. So making sure that your local council's aware that there should be some kind of movement towards environmentally friendly areas is a really good thing as well. So I was just talking about the environment and making sure that you raise with your council, if it's not a dementia friendly environment, that they start considering that, because there are lots of areas now in the country which have dementia friendly cities, dementia friendly towns. They tend to have very good signage. They have pavements that are really clearly defined between pavement and road. It's about making sure that people understand where they're going and what's going on. So good street lighting is really important.
Toilets.
Yeah, toilets
Public
available.
toilets without 20 pence.
And even steps around the house, even just putting a line of paint can make a big difference. It makes it clear where the steps are and it can help people orientate. And
there are quite a lot, if you want to look at your local environment, there are quite a lot of online tools which will let you check your environment to see if it's dementia friendly.
Oh, okay.
So there's a specific one that Scotland have been trialling where you can check whether your
Do you know
environment...
what it's called?
It's linked to Stirling University.
Okay.
So where you can check whether your environment is safe and friendly for people with dementia. But again, if you find that it's not, bring it up with a local council. Make sure they're aware, you know, because dementia friendly communities are really important, that we make sure that people with dementia have the same rights as everyone else. And I think moving on from that, thinking about what sort of behaviours we find acceptable as a society and what sort of behaviours we don't, leads us kind of nicely into a discussion around sexuality and sexual behaviours in people with dementia.
And it's an area that, because it's not often talked about, to some degree is a bit taboo. If you encounter it as a carer, it can sometimes be a bit of a shock, and that's that somebody with dementia may become increasingly uninhibited. So
some sorts of dementia.
Some sorts of dementia, absolutely. So they may be nude a lot more. They may be doing sexual behaviour.
Yeah, they may be masturbating.
Yeah, people's libido can increase massively.
Absolutely,
And
they may think they're a younger person again, you know, in the prime of their sexual life. I always remember looking after a lovely couple in their 80s, and he actually had dementia and thought he was 25 again. And when he came to the hospital about 10 years ago, his wife said, "Oh my goodness," she said, "it's really hard work now because he wants to be sexually active every day." And she was really tired from this, and it was because he'd completely gone back to the prime times of their life. And I think it is good to identify that this can happen.
And even just to be aware that this can happen, and to be aware and think, okay, this might be something I need to talk to someone with, and to get some support.
That's
and to have someone to listen to, and as well as, you know, local organisations, carers organisations, and because this does affect people, and particularly if people's cognition can go, you can get a very unfortunate combination of increased libido, but actually their ability to recognise people may not be the same, and that can be extremely distressing to people. You know, and it can change, again, it can change the dynamic of that relationship.
Absolutely. So
my last Christmas with my mum and dad, they were divorced. They both came for Christmas lunch, and mum decided to launch herself on dad because she'd forgotten, they both had dementia, but she'd forgotten that they weren't married anymore. So she was trying to kiss him. Dad was absolutely like, "Oh, get her off me." And mum was like, "Why won't he let me kiss her?" him, you know. She couldn't understand it, and it was really difficult from that point of view. You know, I have to say that as a family we all thought it was quite funny too, which wasn't funny particularly for poor Dad, and he said afterwards, I was so embarrassed. But actually recognising that she had lost the kind of idea that she was no longer married to him, and that they weren't still together, and they were divorced, and it was really difficult for her. So yeah.
And I think it can be difficult. It can be difficult if you're the partner of somebody with dementia and trying to deal with that yourselves and feeling actually it is okay to talk to people and deal with this thing. But also, as you said, if you're a family member and you can suddenly see one of your parents getting distressed because of the behaviour of the other one, and just to simply think, okay, this is part of the process, this is something other people have gone through. And similarly with other behaviours, trying to understand the root of it and think, okay, how do we develop a strategy?
Yeah.
You know, is really important.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well when people do move into care homes and one partner's left at home. Sometimes people can begin new relationships in care homes, and I have had this experience with some of my patients. And again, that's very, very difficult for the husband or wife that's left on the outside, that their loved one has moved in and struck up a new, quite potentially, you know, close friendship with another person, and they've been almost discounted. And that is a really tricky thing to go through.
Horrible, because you've sort of lost someone twice.
Yeah.
Really
And often the focus is on the person with dementia again, and people aren't thinking about the difficulties that the carers are going through, the mental and emotional stress.
And obviously there might be some safeguarding concerns if that sort of behaviour is happening in care homes, and you know, people have to be safe and protected from harm, because you know, sometimes consent is a massive issue.
Yeah,
absolutely.